There's definitely an art scene in Staten Island. Don't be fooled by mainstream media. Staten Island has little pockets of art, creative people, new businesses. Say your name and title, and I'll do mine.
All right. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bennett, the Executive Director at Staten Island Arts.
And I'm Jenna Momozo, Deputy Director.
And today we're going to be taking you on a tour of some of our favorite locations and businesses on the North Shore of Staten Island,
highlighting the connection between art, commerce, and culture. Here we are at Everything Goes Book Cafe, where literally everything goes. You can find music, you can find art, you can find food, you can find it all here at Everything Goes. This place is the closest to New Orleans in New York. They've made their own library here, people donate books, and they're educating the community around them, which is very important. And now I'm in my living room here at ETG.
I think I'm gonna buy this one. I think I found a winner. Jane Pitney.
It says, kids, you need an adult if you want to see how this works.
So welcome to Staten Island Makerspace. This is a place that's at the intersection of old traditions and new artistic practices, and it's a place where everybody can find everyone else in the Staten Island art community. Emily, can you tell us a little bit about the Makerspace members who are operating their own small businesses out of Makerspace?
Michael Ardito, he runs a company called Hometown Type, and he restores and resells typewriters. So it's kind of magical in a way.
I've noticed that his space has grown.
Yes.
And I hope that that's because his business is growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So he is actually one of the last typewriter repair shops in New York.
Wow.
He's right here in Makerspace.
Here we are at Flagship Brewery, the renaissance of brew culture on Staten Island.
The way this place looks now has a lot to do with how the community wanted it to be. A lot of the stuff you see like this flag those are by people that just hang out here. They just did that one day, you know?
There's an art scene here. He just said it, we're here, we're all here.
And I think that's what makes a community or a neighborhood attractive to just be around or live or open a business. That's what might get people to this neighborhood for the first time. That's what people that frequent this neighborhood, I think, love about it, and we just want to be somewhere in there.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, Julia.
Hello. Hi.
Oh my God, Julia looks amazing.
Thank you. It goes all the way to the back, so if you, so.
You did such a beautiful job setting this up. Am I smelling jasmine?
Yeah, jasmine.
Okay.
That was a great guess. Everyone just wonders like, oh, what's that smell when we come in? And I'm like, jasmine. But you're the first person to figure it out what it was.
So when people drive down Bay Street and they come into the Bay Street corridor, if they're coming from the Verrazano Bridge, one of the first things that they see as they enter the Bay Street corridor is the mural of elephants, the beautiful golden doors that are the doors of your family's restaurant, La Caruana.
You know, a lot of people doesn't really come down to Bay Street as often, but once we did the murals and the golden door, people started to notice like, oh, I should go in there.
Well, and once people pass by it, they will never forget it.
And they'll never forget, they try to come back.
The family that owns La Caruana was looking for a way to share its cultural heritage with the rest of the world. And so the young daughter of the restaurant owner founded the museum, which you can now visit.
So here we are at Hypnotronic Comics, steps away from the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. And a large part of their business is supporting local makers and creators that work here on Staten Island.
This place is a mecca for anybody creative in the area. We're promoting them, and then they tell everybody our stuff is available at Hypnotronic Comics.
Right.
So it's a cross-promotion deal. It's great.
Right. That's a local artist up there on your wall.
Yes, Santo. He's our local artist. We've sold a few of his pieces before.
This is from an artist, Melissa Prieb. She makes jewelry with comic books, and these are some of the things that she brings in. She also makes frames, and we sold out of those because they're awesome, so I got to get some more of those in.
I think what we've done is we've just basically have this great support system that crosses not only through art and culture, but through commerce as well.
And we do that by supporting our local independently owned businesses, which are often owned by artists.
He's got free posters for us.
Graduated from Hypnotronic Comics.
Thanks.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this great Q&A for Woman on Fire. We are very happy to be joined. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of technical. There we go. We're very happy to be joined by Brooke Guinan and Dr. Lisa Sloan for a great conversation. Hopefully all of you had a chance to watch the film earlier today. And here we go. But before we get started, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, thank you again, everyone, for joining. Cinema Connex is really a program by Staten Island Arts that wouldn't be made possible without the funding from the Neighborhood 360 program, which is a great program by the New York Department of Small Business Services that's really focused on trying to help businesses through this grant on Staten Island in the Bay Street corridor. So in that spirit, we have a number of Cinema Connex partners that are open still during this current situation. Please be sure to, as I like to say, stay in and stay local and support those businesses. You can find a link to them in terms of ordering from them for online, for pickup and delivery on the Staten Island Arts website and the Cinema Connex site, which is fantastic. So please, please, please support those businesses. And there's some other ones that aren't open now that are going to be opening again soon. So please make sure you're supporting them when they open back up. Like, for instance, La Caruana, which is actually a reopening for pickup, I think tomorrow on the 1st of June. So that's very exciting. Again, thank you very much. And I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Lisa Sloan, who's the Deputy Director of the Pride Center of Staten Island. And she's going to be taking the conversation from here. So please, Dr. Lisa Sloan, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. If this is the first time that you've gotten to see this gorgeous film, thank you so much for viewing. If, like me, this is a repeat viewing for you, welcome back to this gorgeous film. I wanted to start by just congratulating you, Brooke, on jumping in and being the subject of a documentary film like this. I think this film is really important. I think what you're doing in your career is very important. And I thank you for paving the way for others and for being out in the FDNY as a transgender person. I think that's really so important and so wonderful. I just wanted to start our conversation by asking, how did the opportunity to be the subject of a documentary film come about?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for all the kind words. Yeah, the film actually came about after I participated in the in Voice's grassroots campaign, their like visual media campaign. I participated in that, in their So Trans, So What campaign as a model, and I did it in my firefighter bunker gear. And so I did that, and I had met a bunch of the people who were in charge of Voice. And I met them at one of the LGBT expos at the Jacob Javits Center. And that kind of happened. And from there was actually this like blow up of attention. And it was, yeah, so it was this blow up of attention from, you know, all sorts of media, the Village Voice and local newspapers in New York and sort of, and even out of New York. And I was contacted by Julie Sokolow, who is the director of the film, and she was really the catalyst for it happening. She contacted me, she reached out to me via email, and she basically just said, like, I saw this thing that you participated in, and I thought it was so badass, and I thought that it was so so powerful and like just out there. And she was like, I would love to amplify your story and help you tell your story a little bit more. And so we spoke, and you know, it was very fluid. It was very like, we don't know at that time. It wasn't like she contacted me and said, you know, I want to make a feature film sort of deal. She contacted me, and it was very just let's see what happens, let's see where this goes, would you be willing to talk to me? And so she came out to Queens. I was living in Astoria at the time. And she came out to Queens, and we did like a little 3-day stint. One day she came to my apartment, and we just did some interview stuff in the apartment. There was another day she came, and just kind of, we walked around Astoria and did some shooting and talked some more. And then she did another day where she talked to a couple of other people. She talked to Darren, who was the person basically in charge of Voice at the time, and that grassroots sort of campaign that I took part in. She talked to him, and she talked to my dad a little bit. And she went back to her home, and she cut together this little kind of like 3-minute trailer, and she sent it to me, and she said, let me know what you think, right? She said, we can stop it here if you're not interested. She said, if you're interested, she said, we could turn this into like a 5-10 minute little thing with what we have now. She said, or, and that's when she kind of said, she said, or I'd really be interested. I think there is a lot here. And she said, I'd be interested in going deeper and doing a feature. And so we chatted, and it was kind of a weird experience in the beginning. I had to like take a step back. I was dating my now husband, and she sent me the little trailer, and I showed it to him, and I said, babe, I said, I said, what do you think? On the one hand, I'm sitting here, and for 3 minutes I'm going, ooh, look at how I look on film. And then I said, but then there's this other part of me that as a trans person, like if I take a step back and I take myself out of it, there was part of me that was just like, this is a story that I haven't seen before, right? It's something that, there are so few trans voices out there. And we're talking some years ago at this point. And so it was kind of very right when, it was very right around, the transgender tipping point, like with Laverne Cox and Time Magazine and Orange is the New Black. And it was starting to be all of this discussion on trans lives and trans experience. And so it was really, I felt like a fantastic opportunity to have a trans voice be heard in a way that I didn't think it had really before, especially as a firefighter too, doing something that I felt like as a trans person, for those who have seen the film, hopefully everyone's seen this at this point. But one of the things that I've done in the fire department is working as an LGBTQ advocate, activist within the department, within community affairs, within recruitment, within the diversity and inclusion unit, and sort of going out into the public and doing some recruiting and some educating. And one of the things I encountered a lot was just trans people, one, being really shocked to see the fire department at any LGBTQ function, right? Like any Pride event, the LGBT Expo, whatever it was that we were at, people were always very shocked. They were like, why is the fire department here? I didn't think you all even liked us, right? And then on top of that, when we would say like, hey, do you want a job? People would be like, wait a minute. They would be like, you want queer people in the fire department? They were like, does that even exist? And I would just kind of be like, and so I thought that it was kind of important to have that visual out there, to have that message out there that, we are more than the labels that are put on us. We are more than the limitations that are put on us by the society in which we live in, which tells us that because of who we are as people, we're restricted. And I think there's too much of that message out there, and that affects our community so much in terms of mental health and physical health and what we feel we can do. And so I thought it was important to have that message out there. And so I guess that's kind of how the film came about and why I thought that it was important to do.
Yeah, I think Julie Sokolow was right when she used the word badass. Can you talk about the film takes us to a certain point in time, right? And the film came out in 2016, I think. So how has your life changed after the film?
Yeah, the film came out in 2016. We were shooting the film in 2014 and 2015. And so it actually, we shot the film at kind of one of the most, pun intended, I guess, one of the most transitional times in my life. One of the last things we shot was my wedding when I got married. So obviously that was a huge thing in my life. I moved into my house with my husband. We bought our home together. We got a new dog. There was so much going on. And so I guess when we stopped filming, there was just so much going on, and things have kind of calmed down in my life now, which is nice in some ways. I still am afforded a lot of opportunities to do some really great things as a result of the film, as a result of everything that happened, going all the way back to participating in the Voice grassroots visual campaign. And so I'm very thankful for a lot of the things I've been allowed to do. It has helped me to be able to take a position in the fire department where I was able to do a lot there too. We were able to do a lot of recruitment, a lot of sort of engaging with the community, doing things like going to the Harvey Milk High School and having a pretty regular sort of working lunch with all of the students there who felt they wanted to participate, who were on the gender spectrum in some way, shape, or form. And we get to have a lunch and talk about things that matter to trans people, issues that are important to us as trans individuals. And it's really great to be able to do that for young trans people. I've been able to work with the fire department in creating the first ever LGBTQ diversity training program that we've done in the department. So we've trained all of our fire officers, we've trained all of our EMTs and paramedics, we've trained a large portion of our civilian staff at this point in LGBTQ diversity and inclusion. And so that is great because it really helps us as a public service institution in the city to be able to serve all of the public, not just serve the public that's easiest to reach. And as a trans person, that is really important to know that when an EMT or a paramedic shows up for a trans person or an LGBT person who has called 911 for some reason, that that kind of secondary concern that you have, not only just like what is wrong that I called 911 for, but that secondary concern of, am I going to be treated like a human, right? Am I going to be treated like a person? Am I going to be taken care of? Are people going to be afraid to lay hands on me just to assess what's wrong, right? Like those are some fears that I know as a trans person who has had medical issues before, and I was even a first responder when I had to call 911 for myself. Those were concerns that I had. So I can only imagine what it's like for non-first responders who are trans or LGBT to worry about when having to have those interactions with the FDNY. And so that was really important. I've also been able to travel the country and do LGBTQ diversity training and inclusion for other fire departments and other first responder departments. So I've worked with first responder service in Virginia, in North Carolina, other states. So that's been also a really great opportunity to spread the education and the awareness. So that's been fantastic. But also just, things have cooled down, things have calmed down a little bit. For a while after the film first came out, we were we were touring the country and even going outside of the country for premieres and for Q&As. We went to Canada and a couple of places in Canada. We went to Calgary, we went to Toronto, we went across this country. We had premieres in California. We had premieres in, Bentonville, Arkansas, like we had premieres in places that I never would have thought I would have been invited to as a trans person. And I feel really fortunate to have been able to engage with those communities as well, and hopefully spread some of the education and the love in communities that probably really needed to hear some of this messaging. But nowadays it's a little more chill. I'm back at work in the firehouse, if you can call that more chill. So I'm back at work in the firehouse and doing some extra stuff in headquarters and doing some extra trainings, and really sort of enjoying time down with my husband and with our furry kids and whatnot. So yeah, so life has changed a whole lot since the film.
That's great. I want to pull a couple of things out of the rich answer you just gave us. I wanted to thank you for taking on the labor of teaching other people about the LGBTQ community. Oftentimes, people assume that people who belong to a certain community, identity, or experience um, must teach other people about that experience, and we know that that's not always the case, right? But I thank you for taking that labor on and doing that work on behalf of so many LGBTQ folks. And I thank you again for raising the issue, highlighting the idea that though arguably social stigma has against LGBTQ people has lessened over time, that there are still real needs and real vulnerabilities that our population experiences, and that those vulnerabilities are not distributed equally across all letters of our LGBTQ alphabet soup. And that it's specifically often transgender people, and more specifically transgender women of color, who are the most vulnerable in our community. So thank you for continuing to highlight that and for taking on the duty of educating others. It's real work, and it can be taxing, but it's so important also. I also just wanted to pull out you were saying one of the experiences that was in the film was your wedding to your now husband. Congratulations. I think one of the important things that this film does even if that is sort of like in the background all along, I think, is showing a transgender person in a loving relationship. I think that's not a representation that we see often, and so I was pleased to see that. I'm with each viewing of the film, I remember I say, oh, how that's such a again a positive, loving representation that we don't get often enough. All right, I will move on to my next question. Is there something that you wish had made it into the film that is not in the film, or something that you wish may have been represented differently?
Yeah, totally. So first off, thank you also. I know that you just said some really wonderful things about me, but I know that you are also doing some really phenomenal work with the Pride Center of Staten Island.
Thank you.
So you also know how important it is to serve all of our community and all of the alphabets. And while I am sort of back in the firehouse and back to serving the city as a whole, it's really important to have people doing the work that you're doing. So thank you for the work that you do as well, serving our community specifically, who oftentimes gets overlooked.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah. The film, unfortunately, there are limitations, right, on an hour and a half film that you can do. And so there was one thing that we did talk a lot about that didn't really make it into the film. And I spoke with Julie about it, and it was just kind of, it would have changed, I think, the trajectory of the film a little bit. And it was something that would have required, I think, a lot of time dedication. And that's kind of the mental health aspect of being trans. And so one of the things that we did talk a lot about in sort of the making of the film is my experience with mental health, and that's it's a long story. I've been out as trans now for over 10 years, and it, even before coming out as trans, right, like there was all of this stuff going on, all of this gender sort of exploration that I was on, and I didn't know what it meant. And so really, I feel like I've spent my whole life dealing with gender issues. And I think the catalyst for me coming out as trans really was when I got to a point where I didn't see any other way to live my life without being trans. And then that led me on sort of a whole different mental health journey. And I've been suicidal in my life. I was self-harming for a period of time. I have had a relationship with with antidepressants that has lasted a while. And just that exploration of mental health was something that was really important to me that didn't make it into the film. And so I like to bring that in whenever I'm able to speak, sort of do a Q&A about the film or whatever. So I appreciate you asking that question a lot. Yeah, I think as queer people, we grow up in a society that not once sort of really allows us space to feel like we belong, right? We sort of are sent on this journey to search for affirmation and to search for safe spaces and to search for positive imagery that lets us feel like we are okay as we are. But unfortunately, that is something we have to search for as people, right? It's most non-queer people, or I guess not most non-queer people, as we're seeing in a time in history right now where people of color are also sort of making their voices heard in a very important way. But if you don't fit into sort of the straight, white, heteronormative kind of archetype that our society has been built around, you are not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed any kind of natural feeling of affirmation that you don't have to outwardly search for and fight to keep. And so that is something that, as a queer person, I think a lot of people in our community struggle with mental health. I think that's just a reality that we have to acknowledge and we have to talk about, and we have to really make sure that that's a part of the story of our community, right? Like I think we spend a lot of time in our community focused on pride and resilience, and that's wonderful. And our story should be about that, right? Because that is us too. We are resilient. We are strong. We are innovative. There are so many good things that we can uplift about who we are as people and as a community. I'm getting sweaty talking about all this. But I think we also have to acknowledge the things that are hard to talk about, the things that are difficult to talk about, right? Because there are also things that exist in our community, like struggles with mental health, like struggles with racism and sexism that exist within the queer community as well, right? And and we can't put those aside. We can't ignore them because they're harder to talk about. And so I love the film. I'm thankful that the film is out there as a conversation starter. But that's kind of, I think, how I view this film is it's a starting point to a conversation, right? Like, my story is not the trans story, right? I am not a trans person. There is not one way to be trans. This is my trans experience in this film. It's a snapshot of part of my trans experience in this film, but it's in no way, shape, or form the trans experience, right? As someone who is not a trans woman of color, there is a huge need to have the stories of trans women of color out there and lifted up, so that we can confront those intersections of our identities and talk about how sort of sexism and racism and homophobia and transphobia all mesh and connect. And so those stories are really important and need to be uplifted and heard as well. Just recently, Tony McDade was killed by the police. So he's a trans man of color. We also need to make sure we're uplifting trans male stories. Personally, since this film, I guess this ties into your last question, personally, since this film has come out, I have stopped identifying strictly as a trans woman. I identify as non-binary. I don't identify as male or female. I feel like my identity has become too radical for a heteronormative sort of constraint. And so I don't feel like, I feel like I spent a lot of my life trying to fit into that male thing that I was put into and told that I should be, and failing at that most of my life. And then I spent a whole part of my life where my reaction to not fitting in there was to say, well, then I must be this other thing, right? There's only one other option. And defining myself by sort of that female archetype. And I think I've always been very femme in my expression, hence why I failed at that like male archetype most of my life. And I think probably why I was drawn to that female archetype. But at this point in my life, I think I'm kind of done with trying to fit into an archetype that I don't think was ever made for me to be able to fit into, right? So I identify as non-binary. I don't think male or female are ever going to be labels that fit me. I do identify as femme and fierce, but
Femme power, yes.
yeah, but not as female anymore, really. So it's kind of weird to have this film be called Woman on Fire.
Yeah, but
right?
but that's, I mean, that's important too, to share that piece with us, in the sense that I think so many, you know, we live in a heteronormative society where people imagine gender as something that is fixed, right? And so this idea that we can still discover our gender, you know, and come up with different answers about gender identity across our lives is really important.
Right. Yeah. If it weren't probably a really horrible marketing move, I'd probably be like, hey, Julie, can we change it to like fiery femme or something like that? You know, but it's already out there. But yeah, so that's also something that I guess, you know, there are lots of things when you deal with a film and sort of a snapshot of someone's existence. There are a lot of things that don't make it into the film. There's a lot of things, you know, when the credits start rolling, my life keeps going. So I keep growing and changing and sort of reshaping my world around me. And the world around me continues to reshape me. So so there certainly has been a lot of change in the 5 or so years since we have filmed the movie. So
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's so important. I think thank you also for emphasizing the point about mental health that, you know, maybe didn't necessarily make it into the film, but it still needs to be a part of the conversation, right? What was I going to say about that? I was going to say that even though that didn't necessarily make it into the film, I think the film itself sometimes can act as a balm against that, right? I think there's so much to be said for the joy of seeing oneself in representation, which is why queer film, queer media, queer storytelling, I'm a theater person myself, is so important. I know I'm using the word important a lot here, but I just think that this film is doing so much work, that there are trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary folks who are watching this documentary and seeing themselves or a version of themselves or someone they you know, they know that they are like, and that's it's moving, it's life-changing, it's eye-opening, it can be ecstatic. So
yeah, it's something that it's a conversation I've had with my husband a couple of times, because so my husband identifies or has identified for most of his life as a straight white man, right? And I'm really, you know, in a way, I'm really fortunate, like you said, that I'm in a very loving relationship. And I guess I'm fortunate that I found a person who affirms me and loves me and sees me as I am. And as shocking as it might be that person is a straight white man, you know, because I think our society has kind of made it so that people who do fit oftentimes don't see people like me for who I am. And so I am very fortunate. But one of the ways in which we differ is that, you know, for him, the world was made to consume, right? His entire life has been, he could turn on TV or turn on a song or go see a movie or walk out into the world, and the world is there for his consumption. For me, you know, I grew up not seeing people like me on TV, not hearing lyrics in songs that were affirming to people like me, oftentimes hearing the opposite, right? Oftentimes turning on TV and seeing people like me as a villain or as a throwaway comedy asset or handbag or whatever you want to call it, right? Oftentimes hearing lyrics in songs on popular radio stations that would use derogatory language that was very targeted at people like me. And so, luckily nowadays we live in a world where there is a lot of LGBTQ media for consumption, right? You may have to work to find it a little bit, but it's there. And I fully immerse myself in a lot of it, right? And sometimes my husband doesn't quite understand. He'll be like, oh my God, we're watching another queer movie. And I'll be like, yes. And he'll just kind of be like, or like we'll watch a movie and he'll be like, that was such a bad movie. Like, why do you even like it? And I'll be like, well, it features a part of my existence that I could watch a really amazing, award-winning film that is touching and emotional and all kinds of whatever, and not see myself in it. And so something that I can see myself in just has a little bit more value to me as a person who spent most of my life searching for images that reflected my existence and affirmed my existence.
Yes, and maybe it's not the world's greatest film, but it's doing good work.
Right. And I think it has a different, a movie that's campy and queer can come off to someone who's not queer as like, wow, that was really horrible.
Yes.
Whereas for me, it's like, really? Because it had so many inside jokes. And I think sometimes that's it too, right? It's like, you could turn something on, and if you watch a movie in French and you don't speak French, you may not be able to connect to it, right? Like, well, as a queer person, if I watch a film that's filled with queer double entendre and inside jokes and commentary on queer community, and you're watching it and you're not part of that community, you don't understand the inside jokes. You don't understand the language that's being used. So to you, you're just like, I didn't get that. And it's like, well, there you go.
Well, and so sometimes people forget that representation is addressed to certain audiences, right? Is made for an ideal audience member. And so if you don't fit that ideal, if you're not part of that community identity or experience, it can sometimes be challenging to enjoy in the same way, in exactly the way that you described. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, we do have a couple of questions from folks that are tuning in. So if it's okay, do you mind if I ask those real quick?
Please do.
So the first one is about how life and acceptance within the FDNY has changed over the years, either post-film coming out or, just sort of in the last couple of years. How has that changed?
Yeah, so, there's a lot that the FDNY is a big organization, right? It spans the entire city of New York. We have over 10,000 firefighters alone. And then you add on top of that the number of EMTs, paramedics, fire officers, civilians. It's a huge organization in New York City. And so change takes time when you're talking about an organization that big. I've definitely seen change in a lot of different ways. I'm no longer the only trans person on the job, right? So there are other trans firefighters, there are other trans EMTs and paramedics, there are other trans people in this organization now, and that is not something that was possible, 10 years ago. And so the reality of today is amazing, in a lot of ways. Also, as I said, we had our first LGBTQ diversity training program. That's huge. We have a Pride event, which we do every year, which has been going on now for many years, I think 5 or 6 years at this point now. And so I think that's another important way to have an organization like the FDNY not just show up at different Pride events and say, oh, hey, we're here, you know, but to actually take the initiative to put funding and to put time and effort into creating a Pride event and acknowledging a community that has not always felt welcomed or accepted within the FDNY. That's another thing that I'm proud to have been part of its inception in the fire department. You know, and then the hardest part, I think, is changing the hearts and minds of individuals. And so that's something that I think is still a journey, as we see in the world that we live in, right? We don't live in a utopia. And I've said numerous times that the fire department is a real life. It's the real world. It's not a utopia, right? And so you have to deal with the same sort of microcosms that exist in the real world in the fire department as well. So, you know, we struggle with a lot of the issues that are real world issues. And we're working hard to change some of those difficulties for LGBTQ people, for people of color, for women. And, you know, a lot of those issues were touched on in the film as well. We have more women in the fire department now than ever before in the history of the fire department. So that's fantastic. That's wonderful. I actually am fortunate that I have a woman assigned to my firehouse as well as myself. That's a rare instance. Most women who are in the fire department don't get to work with another woman, or in my case, another femme-identified person, you know. So that's really amazing. You know, I've seen more people of color come into my firehouse. I think we've increased people of color in our workforce as well. So I have seen shifts and changes in the FDNY that are positive, that are really uplifting and inspiring. But I think, you know, as in the real world, that's not a journey that ever ends. We have to remain vigilant and remain focused and remain committed to making these changes permanent and lasting and effective, and that's not something that ever stops.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, it's always a journey. One other question we have has to do with outreach in terms of schools and youth, and if you've had the chance to do that and what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, I've gotten to work with a lot of fantastic organizations. There's one organization called Live Out Loud, and they are New York City based. They work throughout the 5 boroughs and Long Island. They work in New Jersey as well in some places. And they're a fantastic organization that I was able to partner with many years ago and work with for a good number of years, where they have a couple of different facets. One, they work with LGBTQ organizations within schools. So within high schools and middle schools, whether it's gay straight alliances, gender sexuality alliances, queer unions, whatever it is in schools, to work with young people. And they go in and they do individual sort of lesson plans on education on queer history, uplifting different aspects for young people, young folks. They also do a program which is a mentor program, which I was able to take part in, where they bring someone to a school to sort of share on their experience and be a role model for these young people and allow these young people to sort of ask questions. And so I was able to do that for a number of years with Live Out Loud. And that was really fantastic. They do a homecoming project where they send people back to their own school that they graduated from, to speak as a graduate of that school, and provide a connection for people who are there now, who may be going through something. I've also been able to work with the Hedrick Martins Institute. I've been able to work with the Harvey Milk High School, which, as I said, the Harvey Milk High School, I've been able to work with them and do a fairly regular program where I go in and we have sort of a working lunch with the kids on the gender spectrum there. And that's been really rewarding. Not going to a different school each time, as I kind of did with Live Out Loud, but going back to the same school and being able to engage with the same kids. I've done that now for a number of years, and I've been able to see some kids come and go and graduate and work with some other kids for a number of years. And that's really heartwarming to be able to connect on a more lasting basis with some of these young folks. But yeah, I think it's really important to not just engage with other adults, but to specifically engage with young folks as well. And then on top of all that, just being able to do some recruitment, go into schools, and talk about, talk to young folks about opportunities that exist in the world, and to not let their mindsets be limited on what they can and cannot do post high school, when they get out into the workforce, and have to choose a future and a career for themselves. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to engage with a lot of young folks.
That's awesome. And I would like to ask just one question sort of on that I often think about, and that's how, as a white cis gay man, who I identify as queer, how can I be a better ally to the trans community? What are some of the things that I can do that are very concrete, that would make me a better ally?
I think one, which is something that, we all can do in different ways. As a white person, I can critique my friends who are white as well. When I hear them say something that is problematic, or when I see them share something that's problematic, I can educate them, right? I cannot leave it for my friends who are people of color to have to do that work and do that education, because it can be stressful. It can be time consuming, emotionally draining. It can be a lot of things to constantly feel like it's your job to educate the world. I know, Lisa, you brought that up before. So I think that it's really important to sort of not let those things slide just because you're not part of that specific community. So if you're not the T, but you hear something going on that is in some way transphobic, or is sort of a misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of gender identity or gender expression, to speak up and to do your part to sort of elevate education for the community. I think that that's really important, because I think that's how we change hearts and minds. And I think it's also very effective when it comes from a trans person. I think in some ways it can be like, well, of course you're going to say that, you're trans, right? But if it comes from someone who's not trans, it can be like, oh shoot, like this is from someone who matters in my life, and they're not trans and they're saying this, so maybe I should think about it, right, in a different light. And so I think it's really important that, we as trans people, we can't do this work without our allies. I also think that in a lot of ways, people try and separate out the T a lot of the time, which I can understand. Sex, gender are very different things. I mean, sex, gender are different things, but sexuality is very different from sex and gender, right? So we are talking about very different experiences. However, at the same time, I always like to point out that when people use derogatory language, right? When someone calls you a faggot, right? I got called a faggot many times in my life, and I didn't have sex for the first time until I was in my 20s. So, there was a long period of history for me where I was getting called faggot on a regular basis, and I wasn't even having sex. So how would people know, right? People who are gay are not out in the streets having sex all the time, and people are like, oh, I see you having sex, you're gay, right? We make assumptions based on gender expression, based on gendered issues. And so in a lot of ways, the fight of trans people is the same fight of L, the G, the B people, right? Because we're all sort of fighting in this world of heteronormativity, where the world of heteronormativity doesn't see a difference between sex, gender, and sexuality, right? That's all one ball of yarn for them, right? We, as people who live outside of a heteronormative culture, we can tear that ball of yarn apart, right? And we can say, well, here's sex, here's gender, here's sexuality, right? They're separate, right? And we can pull those apart, and we can talk about how we're different. And that's important. We also have to know how we're different. But at the same time, we have to understand the ways in which our fights align. right? Sort of that intersection, again, intersectionality being super important, right? And so I think that that's a way in which lesbian, gay, bisexual people who are dealing with issues of sexuality can be allies to trans people as well, just by knowing that those things exist, and not ignoring them and not ignoring that fight, and speaking up and being educated yourself.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Lisa Sloan, back to you.
Thank you for those questions. That was that really enriched our discussion, I think. If there are no more questions from our audience, I don't have any more to ask either. Brooke, is there anything that we haven't addressed in our conversation so far that you want to bring to the fore?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've noticed at this point that I can talk forever. So
we love it. We love it.
I could just, we can talk about X-Men comics if you want, but
I was actually going to ask if you'd seen 911 Lone Star.
I have not.
Yeah, are you familiar with the show?
I'm not. I'm assuming it's a Texas-based show about 911.
It is. Yeah. So it's a Ryan Murphy show, and the reason I ask is because I think Ryan Murphy really set out to make what is quite possibly the most diverse cast, I think, on television. And the 911 series is one that's set in LA, and this one's Lone Star in Texas. It's sort of a combination of first responders and 911 operators, and sort of like the dispatchers in that relationship. But it's sort of like the center of it is Rob Lowe, but the cast is absolutely amazing. And one of the people that's on the show is actually a trans man, a firefighter played by Brian Michael Smith. But there's also someone in the firehouse who is Muslim. There is someone who, it really talks about the diversity. And one of the things I really love about the show is that it's not just about the diversity of the lives, and each of the different person's identities aren't necessarily forefronted, because it's showing, trans people and queer people, because there's Rob Lowe's son is gay, living their lives as they would live their lives in fully rounded characters without ignoring the issues that they actually face in those situations, which I think is a really great way of dealing with those kinds of issues.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds like a good show. I'll have to check it out. Sounds like
it's interesting
group of people on the cast.
Yeah, it's really, and then it's also really great to see Brian Michael Smith, who's a trans man playing a trans character. So or trans characters played by actual trans actors, which is nice too.
Right. Yeah. I think so. I didn't know that was this show, but I had seen about him playing this character on TV. I didn't know that it was for 911 Lone Star. So I'll definitely have to check that out. And yeah, it's interesting. Being in the firehouse, no one else in my firehouse is queer. So in my personal life, being queer is a huge deal, right? It's a big part of who I am. Whereas in the firehouse, it's not like in some ways in the firehouse, it is a big deal because I'm the only queer person. And so there's this constant barrier and this constant, almost like I was talking about before with watching a queer film or a queer TV show or whatever, and there's this different language that's going on. There's so many times in the firehouse where I'll say something, I'll make a joke or I'll make a comment, and I'll get a what kind of face, and I'll just be like, oh, that's right, you don't get it, right? So it's interesting that being in the firehouse, my being queer is not what it's about, right? Because they don't know how to interact with me as a queer person. So there's other ways that we have to find to sort of interact. So it can be interesting. It can feel very much like that show, like you're talking about, how a lot of times people's identities can become background a little bit. It's not focused at all times, and that can be a blessing and a challenge at the same time. I think finding that balance between having you be your authentic self and you being part of a team and you being understood and you feeling validated. In a, you know, I work 24-hour shifts a lot of the time, so
Wow.
you know, you kind of want to be in a place where you feel validated, and you feel, you know, in a 24-hour period of time, you want to feel like you are seen, like you are a real person, and then at the same time, having your identity also be something that can just exist and not have to be debated or featured or whatever, right? Like when I'm in the firehouse, my identity is not always it's not always the most important thing going on, right? We have very other important things happening in the firehouse that have to be addressed that have nothing to do with me being queer. That have nothing
Exactly.
to do with my identity or anyone else's identity.
Yeah.
And so it's a good balancing act. But yeah.
Well, thank you again, both of you, so much for joining us and everyone who tuned in. Before we head out, I just wanted to make a very quick announcement that here in the next day or so, we will actually be announcing the lineup for the Downtown Film Festival, which is going to be taking place on June 11th to the 14th. We have a number of films and some really exciting programs set up. And we're also going to have a couple of really great professional development programs that are focused on Staten Island. One of them is with the program manager for the Made in New York PA training program. And if you want to get into the industry, starting off as a PA and working your way through is probably one of the most effective and best ways to do it. And this is a free program that actually helps train and place people in those areas. And also with a Staten Island native, Jeff Gomez, who is the CEO of Starlight Runner Entertainment. And Starlight Runner is probably not a name you know, but I promise you, you know the work that they've done. So he's going to be a really great conversation talking about keeping creative and keeping the arts alive, cinema, comic books, video games, amusement park rides. He's worked in it all, and it's going to be a really great conversation. So be sure to look for at the Staten Island page here in the next couple of days. We're going to be announcing that lineup, and all the programs are going to be free of charge.
Amazing.
So thank you both again very much, and I think that pretty much wraps it up. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
For joining.